Hey, today I'm going to talk about Loewe Spring 2024 collection. Hopefully I can do runway reviews on YouTube, and I wanted to connect it to Jonathan Anderson's Off Waterman exhibition on foot in London. The first theme that I noticed throughout the collection was the concept of blurring reality and surrealism, art, and objective versus subjective stances, and he references David Hockney in his exhibition, and David Hockney uses, rather than cameras, a lens in order to reflect and cast images that he sees onto canvas, which is historically the way that a lot of paintings would be constructed before we had the ability to photograph. And I watched this documentary that talked about how photography, according to the BBC, has a monopoly on what we consider the truth and reality, as paintings did in the past. And it talked about how it's kind of about having control over the view of the truth. And because of this, I feel like Jonathan Anderson does at Loewe encourages you to question what reality is, the difference between clothes online, clothes in real life, what that means, and how that affects our lives. And that's kind of what I'm going to be talking about throughout. I feel like Jonathan Anderson's work at Loewe and at J.W. Anderson encourages contemplation about reality versus fiction, especially in a context where we spend so much time on our phones. I've talked before about the artificial intelligence images that people cannot discern. It makes reality and the things that are true more sacred, but then it also puts you in a position to contemplate what is true. And to me, I think that the way that this is framed as it relates to the Loewe collection and Jonathan Anderson's work is it gives us an opportunity to question the extent of the body as well. I've talked about Mediating the Human Body as an anthology, and how there's an excerpt that talks about how people sometimes, theorists will consider the distance your voice can go an extension of your body. Like if I'm in an echoey cave and I say hello, 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 the sound reverberates throughout the cave, and to some people that's an extension of me. That means I was present at that distance. And to some people the body stops where you can physically touch it. To me, I think it's worth contemplating, where the body stops and where it begins. And especially in a digital context, I feel like in a digital world, you construct online images as your avatar in order to communicate with and construct an identity to other people. And that is you, right? For some people, that's the only way that they know you is online. Does it mean it's not you just because it's intangible? No, isn't that still an extension of you? Surely. Or is it an extension of your mind? In this way, we can consider how that shapes design, how it places emphasis back onto the quality of construction when it comes to fashion design, attention to fine details, our clothes' ability to evoke conversations and discussions, returns us to these ideas of presence rather than just existing digitally and, reconfiguring what we think about what the self is. So that brought me to the idea of the value of the space between reality and imagination, of course. And I think about the art featured in his curation at On Foot by Lynette Yiadom-Boakye, who credits Toni Morrison as one of her early inspirations. She said that she read a lot of literature as a child, and she describes Toni Morrison as melding the impossible with the very real, the fantasy with reality. And if you've ever read Toni Morrison's work, it can be very dense, but I think it's very worthwhile to at least listen to via audiobook or read and take the time with it. And she talks about a night terror that she had. Yiadom-Boakye talks about a night terror that she had when she was younger of a dog applying mascara while standing on its hind legs, which is horrifying just to even say those words. When she spoke about it, I was extremely disturbed and unsettled. And she said that it kind of terrorized her, and she remembered it for a long time, and it stayed with her, and she kind of tries to incorporate the tone of something like that in her work. Okay, and so in terms of the space between reality and imagination, to me, this connects to dialogue, especially as, again, it relates to Lynette Yiadom-Boakye's work specifically. She composes portraits based on photographs and past compositions, scrapbooks, old images, composed of all of these other references that make up these new people. And she mentions how some of the rooms in her curated exhibition at Tate, the paintings will be facing you as you enter the space, but in other rooms, they all have their backs turned to you because they're in dialogue with each other. And to me, this form of constructing dialogue between the work, the way that it's contextualized and spatialized, including within the work, like it puts you inside of the work, I think it's brilliant, and it's so completely connected to the way that Jonathan Anderson contextualizes his work. And I think that that's part of why he framed some of Yiadom-Boakye's work in the pub setting. Like the whole point of On Foot is like, you're essentially taking a trip through, like a walk through London, and I feel like it centers you back into like community and exchange and dialogue that occurs, that creates the life of what London is. It's a dialogic and reflective perspective that creates the work alongside the audience and like directly in connection with the audience. A dialogue between commercial fashion industry, high fashion industry, the art world, the public viewing it, the wearer, the people around them interpreting it. I think it all speaks to the space between dreams and reality, and almost the space closer to nightmares and reality. And I think even when it comes to being in dialogue, Jonathan Anderson's reverence for the House of Loewe and their traditions and history themselves, and the way that he tries to incorporate them but maintain this sense of modernity in his work, is a dialogue. I think the references to the archive and the level of craftsmanship that they are known for historically, and maintaining that, is like him being in dialogue with the fashion house's legacy. And I think that that idea of constructing clothes in dialogue brings me to the idea of timelessness and universality. Again, something brought up by the Tate exhibiting Yiadom-Boakye's work. And I see the parallel between that and some of Jonathan Anderson's work. And the reason why they talk about the timelessness of her work is, like I said, she's pulling from all these references, photographs, past images, her memory of her own brushstrokes, language essentially of brushstrokes, where you understand that this brushstroke goes here in order to construct a face that looks like this when the shadow is cast in this direction, etc., etc. Like her work doesn't look like it's stuck in one period, essentially. Like there's no long-winded way to say it. Her work doesn't look like it's stuck in any one period. It could be from the 60s, it could be from 2010, it could be from yesterday. You can't really tell. It's a little bit more ambiguous in that way. But still universal in that way. And I think that Anderson's work is direct parallel to that, especially at this Loewe collection. His work honors Loewe's traditions, but it makes the work modern, but still not confined to any current trend fluctuations, allowing it a sense of timelessness and universality. And that's what's so compelling about his work. The focus is, again, more on human relationships with the real world rather than just online signaling or even making this kind of social commentary, which, again, I think is an area of refinement that's happened over the last few seasons at Loewe. Not to say that it's not still a commentary on like you always be on that phone vibes, but rather than having like the more overt screen trench coats, right, that are shoulder to ankle screens of nature videos playing on them, maybe reminding us of the power of craftsmanship by putting a needle through fabric, or a straight pin through fabric as a blouse or skirt. Maybe less overt way of symbolizing, you know, human relationships and the ability for humans to bring life to, you know, clothing, and reminding us of nature using like some of these more organic fabrics. So we see like the massive quality of craftsmanship at the House of Loewe, the repeated use of Duchess satin, calfskin for the suede pieces, lambskin, shearling, wool, cashmere, 100% cotton, and just like the divine appearance of it. Like the work looks so buttery, soft, the leathers look so high quality, the pieces are crafted with such care and attention to detail. You can spot it from across the runway, or you could spot it in these HD images. Like the quality of construction reminds us of the fact that humans put together fashion. It's high quality, but it has a symbolic connotation. Like I said, we have the ability to think about our relationships with each other, and power, and construction, and how that can be transformed over time as our relationships with technology transform over time. It has all of the resonance to do that, but it's not just symbolic. So then I talked earlier about how this vision has kind of been refined over seasons, from literal screens and growing grass, you know, in order to remind us and confront us with nature, to these more symbolic constructs. I feel like the screens indicate people's relationship with technology and clothing, and the need to be reminded of nature, because we're always on our phones and then we're always just posting a picture, and the outfit is for Instagram or for, you know, whatever social media feed in order to establish identity to people. And it brings us back to the original point of like, what is a me? who am I? Who is me? Like, am I the avatar that exists online that can wear the disposable clothes for a short period of time in order to thirst trap and garner people's attention or whatever, or even establish myself as like an intellectual or whatever? Am I that, or am I the person that exists in real life and maintains relationships and interacts with the tangible world, etc.? I feel like the screens were there to make us contemplate that. And are we having these interactions with nature, or are we having these thoughts about nature? Like, are we directly going into nature when we're critiquing the impact of fashion on the environment, etc., or are we just thinking and talking about it on social media screens, which doesn't really, resolve anything ecologically? It's kind of establishing this contribution to his legacy at the House of Loewe and at his own house, and to the fashion industry entirely, by having his curation in 2017, I believe, was the first one, and then transitioning the fashion house, slowly over the course of that time to the appearance that it has now. I also feel like at both houses, he's always done a sort of patchworking and uses like kind of excessive fabric, and it was kind of trying to make these commentary look after look from Jonathan Anderson's namesake. And at the House of Loewe, it would be like a lot about patchworking and layering a lot of ideas on at once, and kind of making people think about the construction of clothing. So yeah, I said that they're not impossible to imagine clothes, but they 100% comment on the comparison between universal forms of dressing and our understanding of clothes and what could be more dramatized. So he's not trying to construct a fashion image of a perfected past when he's referencing the legacy of the House of Loewe. He's not escaping from reality by trying to construct this idea of nostalgia. Things were so much better back then. Things were perfect back then, and I'll show you that through clothes. He's not demonstrating that the past was some kind of perfect time. And this is why we should consume, so that we can get back to a perfect past. That's not what he's designing, right? Nor does he construct this idea of a perfect future by constructing this idea of futuristic, perfected fashion either, which we always see season after season. This is how people will dress in the future. This is the future of fashion. This is said every single season. It's like of the past, of the future, of the now, of no time, of our imaginations, and grounded in reality. It's like so conflicting in this way that it exists almost in another dimension. I've spoken before about how Jonathan Anderson talks about casting fashion in anti-fashion environments and art existing in environments that are not necessarily natural to their history of how they've been contextualized. And it makes me think about the mundane, which I think is central to Anderson's work, and I think he highlights and then broadens the ideas of the mundane. And so on top of the work that he features at the On Foot exhibition, like Lowry's work, which for example portrays industrial life in Britain, his work is not impossible to imagine in the lived experiences of his actual customers, right? He uses Jürgen Teller a lot. He uses Jürgen Teller to photograph his collections, contextualizing his work in reality and in the hyper-mundane rather than fantasy. And I think in this way, first of all, Jürgen Teller's work in general is very polarizing because it reminds us of the unresolvable aspects of life, and these unresolvable aspects of life and fashion are universal. And I think that's kind of something that makes people sometimes uncomfortable when it comes to looking at high fashion images or what are supposed to be aspirational or exclusive images, when they see something that is universal and reminds them of themselves and grounds them in their own identities and unites us. It's like unsettling because it's not as common a way of advertising, and I think that that's what makes Jürgen Teller and a few other photographers really special. Teller's mysterious, mundane, eerie, surreal images highlight the vulnerability of his subjects, humanizing them amongst decay and orienting them around the ability to effectively establish identity and mortality. What was that sound? So there's like a complexity of placing high fashion in reality rather than these fantastically constructed, conventionally aspirational advertisement contexts, right? Which sell us a perfected eternity or an ability to buy our way out of mortality or the other universal experiences of humanity. And I think that that's why I love Jürgen Teller's work and why I think that they go together, right? Like what do they have in common? That's kind of what I took from this collection overall, and that's what it helps me establish and understand about and appreciate about Jonathan Anderson's work at Loewe.